So just to begin, could you both state your names for the camera?
Patricia Walker.
James Walker, husband of Patricia Walker.
And how long have you two lived in Lake Oswego?
Gosh, it's like 45, 46 years.
45, yes.
Yeah, and where did you two move from?
From Southern California. We lived in a town called Solana Beach, right next to La Jolla. Right on the beach, in fact.
And either one of you can answer this, but as what brought you to Lake Oswego in particular?
Okay, we were familiar with the area because we had lived.
Our first home that we built here in Oregon was built about 4 miles from where we are now in 1970.
Mm-hmm.
And I got promoted from my position here. I was with a little company called Xerox, and had been with them for several years. And she was teaching and enjoyed that. And we wanted to, if we were going to change positions, we need more money and a pleasant place to live. And Xerox offered me an opportunity, and originally in Orange County, California, at Huntington Beach. So we lived there for a couple of years, and I promoted again and went to San Diego County, and chose to live in another town in northern San Diego County.
And we had children.
Yeah, we actually had just one when we get down to San Diego, and we had 2 more children.
Yes, but we wanted the children to have a good education, and we knew Lake Oswego was a place where they could get a good education.
Not that they couldn't in La Jolla, but we thought that there'd be more children like them in La Jolla. The farther from the city center, in contrast to the northwest, the farther from the city center, the whiter the community you lived in. And we didn't object to living in a majority white community, but that was just too far for it. We thought it wouldn't be fair to them. They'd be missing a large part of life.
Yeah, we wanted them to be close to our parents because we didn't grow up with our grandparents, and we wanted our children to grow up with grandparents.
Mm-hmm.
So let's back that up a little bit, because you both have Northwest roots, obviously. And I guess, Pat, you could start off by just talking about, if I remember correctly, you grew up in Vanport, right?
Well, until I was 3.5,
mm-hmm.
I was in Vanport, and I was born at Best Kaiser Hospital over in Vancouver. But my father worked for Kaiser building ships until the flood came.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved into Portland, yes.
Right.
It's not fair to say just building ships, though, because they did it from the ground up. They brought in the metals, and they bent the metal, they heated the metal, they put the motors on, the conditioning systems, the piloting systems, the whole thing, from raw materials to a vessel, a man of war, a vessel that could sink other vessels like itself. They were either German or Japanese.
Mm.
That was in the midst of, so you can now date us, we're in the midst of a World War. Her parents chose to come here. My parents came to the Washington state, and my father was a boat builder for the U.S. Navy, wooden boats, so not metal boats. Every large vessel had a captain's gig, and they were custom made so much for the newly commissioned captain, and my dad made those for the 13th Naval District, which included San Francisco at that time.
Right. And he was talking about like, or sorry, go ahead.
Also, my brother and my father both worked in, after that, moved to Lake Oswego. We didn't move, but they worked for Oswego Lake Country Club. So that's another reason that I knew Lake Oswego. Sometimes I'd come to work with my dad as a kid. So it was quite different then.
So you said you were like aware of the area. Did you know about the whole like Lake No Negro stigma / nickname?
You did?
Yes, I knew about it. And like I said, my brother and father worked at the country club, and there were very few, if any, African Americans in Lake Oswego. So I may not have heard of the term, but
the term,
it fits.
Term Lake No Negro?
Yes, the term Lake No Negro. Yeah.
So kind of to that point about, not being like a lot of us in the city, what types of things would you all do as far as like, just like seeking out communities, specifically like Black community, not just like in Lake Oswego, but usually I know like with my parents, for example, most of that was outside of LO. Can you just talk a little bit about, just building community in the area?
Okay, yes. Well, we kept in touch with our Portland community because that's where most of the people of color were. So we continued to go to the church we had been married in. And it was
physically in the center of North Portland.
Yes. And we belonged to fraternities, sororities, and children's groups so that our children could be exposed to people of color. So we kept that going the whole time. And so we were in touch with our community outside of Lake Oswego.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say Lewis and Clark and a couple of other places like that, our schools.
And can you just talk a little bit about, how was, let me back up for a minute. Yeah, you talk about having, children going through LO. Like, you just talk a little bit about their experience.
How's it work?
Either one of you can respond to that.
Well, yeah, our kids, they didn't talk about it a lot until
about what
they didn't talk about how they felt a lot until they were older, a little bit older. But now that they're older, they said they felt isolated many times. Sometimes they'd be the only student of color for most of their classes. And so they felt like they weren't part of everything, especially after they turned old enough to drive. Because then that's when we noticed things really started to change, when they were old enough to drive. And they had several different experiences. For example, we told our oldest child he needed to carry ID with him because one day he and a white friend were driving in a car. They were very nerdy kids and never got in trouble, never talked back or anything. And I was driving south on the freeway just before the 217 interchange. And I saw my son.
Did they have a 217?
Yeah, they did.
I went through a dirt road.
I saw my son and his friend, and everything was out of the friend's car, spread along the freeway, and they were hands up against the police car.
Was his friend black or white?
His friend was white. And I could see him mouthing the words, my son, there goes my mother. So of course I took the exit and turned around as quick as I could and came up that side of the freeway. And I asked, what's the problem, officer? And they said, well, one of their lights was out or something. Just, you know, it seemed like they made it up. It was Tigard police. And I said, they said, who is, I said, this is my son. And I said his name, and they said, oh yeah, we had his name, but he has the same name as a well-known gangster. So we were getting ready to take him in. And I said, what is your badge number? And then they talked for a while and decided that maybe they had done nothing wrong. And so they were able to put their belongings back in the car, and they let them go. And I never reported that, other than I've told the story. And I've told them, always have ID on you, or they may say you're somebody else or somebody who you aren't. So those kinds of things happen more than once. And so we arranged for two of our boys to go to Portland to go to school. They wanted to be where there was more diverse. And so they went to school in Portland and graduated from high school there. Anything to add, James?
We waited until they were old enough to drive and bought them a car so they wouldn't trouble us to them to go to each state of school in Portland.
It seems that if you were well accepted if you were an athlete in Lake Oswego.
If you were black and an athlete?
If you were black and an athlete.
Mm-hmm.
If you weren't, you should have some other important interest, not necessarily a school subject or experience.
You know, it's funny you say that last part, just because I did an interview some years back with a person, not another person of color who we both went to school around the same time, and not black, but said pretty much verbatim the exact same thing about how it's just a different experience. Like, he even noticed how they treat black athletes versus just black students who are not involved in sports, specifically, you know, basketball, football, baseball, track, the big things that everyone knows. Mm-hmm. And again, I think because I graduated in 2007, so you're talking about someone of that, there versus, you all who have been in this town for decades. So I just think, yeah, that kind of brings me to my next question about, how have things, I guess, specifically when it comes to like race relations in Lake Oswego, how do you think, or have you seen things kind of change over the years? If so, how, and what things haven't, I guess. Mm-hmm. And James, you can start that one off if you'd like.
Happily. Okay, how have things stayed the same and how have things changed? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. There are two communities of color here now, and perhaps even a third. I think it's fair to say the numbers are small, that didn't exist in the numbers they do now. When we came here, we came here because it was just a short walk from our old house. We had a house on Southwest 27th, near what was called, later became Jackson High School. And so it was a easy to transit from there to here. And we just wanted to be a little farther out of town and avoid some of the controversies that went about in town and some of the issues that young people had. So we certainly had 3 young people that we were going to try and educate well and travel them well and treat them well and expect others to treat them well. Don't know where to go with that, but having said all that, the biggest issue that we saw was differences in how children were treated in Oswego. But Oswego had so few people. It had few white people, for that matter, when we moved here. It had few white people. It had few Asian people, a handful of each. So there was, the area that we lived in was in the middle of a big field with some trees along the edge of a creek. That was it. And it became 3 different places. It became West Ridge, and they built a school there. It became Palisades. They built a school in the, quote, Palisades area, a little higher elevation than the West Ridge area. And they built some houses alongside the river that went through the town called next door. I don't know.
River Grove?
No, the town where the winery is. I forget a lot of stuff these days. I don't know if you know it or not, I recently had a couple of heart attacks, and so I tend to forget things. So I'm going to ask my wife to pick up when I left off here.
Okay. Well, I had taught in Portland for 23 years, and when we moved to Lake Oswego, I retired in 2002. And then I immediately became a substitute, K through 12 substitute in Lake Oswego, and a home instructor. And I did that for the last 17 years until 2019. And I wasn't the first Black teacher. There was a Black teacher at Forest Hills for quite a while before she retired. And then when I would substitute, I only ran into one other teacher, Black teacher. And the kids all thought, they asked me if I was his mother. And because they didn't see that many Black teachers, they thought I was substituting for him because I was his mother. And, but I really didn't run into any difficulties going to people's homes or
to come into our home. Yeah.
As far as substituting, I never ran into any problem as far as I know. So
I never had any difficulties either because my children were involved. I ended up coaching baseball and basketball and soccer and being a hall patrolman when I was in town. I traveled a good deal in my business. I was a U.S. sales manager for a frozen food company. And so I was out of town quite often for a week or two. And never had any, quote, racism expressed directly or in a confrontative way with me at all. And because the children saw me and they all knew me from me being a hall patrolman. And I served on the school. They had each school has a board of directors, allegedly. It depending on how you view it. It's sort of a custom to involve 7 or 8 parents in what goes on in the school. Maybe be it academic or athletic or whatever, or volunteer basis. Those things were there. So I served in one of those for 5 years, and for the junior high school, which is now called, it's not
Lake Ridge Junior High.
It's called Lake Ridge Junior High. It was called Waluga Junior High before. Where was I? You pick up now.
Well, let's see. we, I don't know if you've asked us this already, about building community with other people of color. And we're fortunate enough for the group Respond to Racism to be initiated here. And that brought out lots of people to hear our stories and our experiences in Lake Oswego. We had speakers, we had a lot of eye-opening testimony. And from that,
it was all isolated, one-on-one, rather than a group kind of a thing, converging on another group that was different in some way. We never saw any naked confrontative behavior performed by anybody.
that's good. And from that, a couple of groups did spring from that. African American women of Lake Oswego and surrounding areas. And we still meet as a women's group. And
Black Men's Gourmet Club, we met every other month, and 5 to 10 different Black gentlemen made dinner entrees for our spouses and ourselves in a very formal the kind of suits we wore, what do they call it? Tuxedos. Like I said, I've forgotten a lot of things. The tuxedos were in formal attire in homes. And that was, we really enjoyed that because we didn't have much opportunity for that here. Maybe in some other places that might be true too.
And also from Respond to Racism, I think the Lake Oswego government started some new committees, equity committees, and asked people to be on them. And there were several changes because we started to listen to one another. And we joined with other groups like, I think it was called Love.
LO for Love?
LO for Love, that's what I'm thinking of, yeah. And we were able to do some activities together. And then, of course,
as families.
After George Floyd, we joined together with other groups and marched in support of changes.
Yeah. And you talked about a little bit about some of the things that have kind of changed and some of the groups that have, emerged, especially in like the last few years. But I guess just like going forward, what would you like to see, like in terms of changes, in terms specifically in regards to, Black community members, people of color in LO?
That's a little different one to see. And the reason they say it's difficult to see, when we came here, there were not that many people of non-color in Lake Oswego. It's just a little point between points and in between Wilsonville and Portland. That's all it was, and with homes on spacious lots. And what happened? Some lots began to get split up into quarters or halves in some cases, and more houses grew there. Well, we've seen pretty much we're already close to the limits on that. There's pretty little opportunity to build a subdivision again. The only thing that really remained rigid about was it was in written rather than form, in spoken form, was the requirement that you live in Lake Oswego in order to use Lake Oswego. Well, after a bit, somebody looked at that a little more closely, as the numbers of Black people and Chinese people and Asian people increased. And they made the rule that you had to have a trust deed that included ownership, shared ownership in Lake Oswego, and the land that the lake was on. By doing so, they're able to exclude a number of people who just were not quite on the perimeter of the lake. So the lake usage went down quite a bit. When that went down, a lot of the people who enjoy that kind of exclusivity left because they didn't have enough room to exercise their horses anymore. So now you'll see these barns that are on the park road, and I don't remember the name of the street. I never paid attention, but you don't see horses there anymore being exercised or walked or even raced. It's because they aren't any, and because nearly all the empty lots now have houses on them. So we're sort of land bound in a very real way. You ask the question, what change is going to happen? Is that they have come back and made an offer to the city of Lake Oswego that says anybody who lives in the boundaries of Lake Oswego will have access to the lake. And any family member will have access to the lake just by producing an identification that shows they actually live here. And you will put a boat in the lake then too. And that looks like it's getting a good reception because it's made a number of people quite wealthy by having generous sized lots originally for their houses. Lots that might have originally warranted having 4 or 5 houses on it instead of just one house. And those lots now are suitable for 2 houses, but they're really only one. The other 3 became 3 other houses because the taxes had gone up on the bare land, and the people had chosen to sell it. Sorry, I dropped my cane. That sounded like a handgun going off, didn't it? Yeah. I'm done talking.
Okay. Well, Jane, I'd like to see more teachers of color in the schools so the kids don't feel so lonely and isolated. Or
police officers of color too.
Police officers and administrators. Mm-hmm. So that's always been a difficult problem because we live in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of people don't want to move to the Pacific Northwest because they know they'd be a minority. Mm-hmm. I served on Teacher Standards and Practices Commission for 6 years, and they have a lot of trouble too, trying to figure out how to include more people of color in education in Oregon. But we're gradually doing it. So, anything else, James?
Nothing comes to mind. I'm sure we missed something.
Well, yeah, thank you too for taking the time this afternoon. Before we hop off, is there just anything else you'd like to add about anything we've kind of talked about in general, or just, again, your experience, your time being, longtime residents of Lake Oswego?
The only thing I could add that I'm not sure where it belongs is that there isn't any real difference between the people of color living here and the people of non-color who live here. It's same income levels, same educational levels, same aspiration level, average same family size. It's a bunch of the same folks that some of them wear different colors. That's all.
I agree.
And sometimes it surprises some of those people, some of the Black ones, that there are white people here, and the white ones, that that there are Asian or Black ones or Black people here. So it's interesting to see how the change that's comes. It's going to, because of the change in interest rates and changes in property taxes and some of the other things that are going on, we're going to see even more compact housing as we move along here, and smaller lots, and maybe even some two and 3 story apartment houses that we never expected to see.
Okay. Well,
That's something that's down the pike, and it seems like it's warranted.
Yeah. Pat, James, Walker, thank you again for taking the time this afternoon, and yeah, enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah.